Recent statistics showing that there are over 2.5 million people in Kenya living with some form of hearing impairment. And despite these huge numbers, the deaf community still cries to be heard. Amidst challenges in accessing jobs and other services, language barrier remains the greatest challenge. The realities of day-to-day struggles for persons with hearing impairment are evident in this family in Kiambu. In the Juguna family, both parents are deaf, but all their 3 children are able to hear. One of their children is, however, autistic. We get to spend some time with them, and they reveal to us the challenges they face.
She's also deaf.
In this household, the biggest challenge they face is lack of employment. Due to their condition, both Njuguna and his wife Helen cannot get work despite being trained teachers. They are now forced to depend on their extended family to sustain them.
Since 2012, up to now, I've just been volunteering to teach. Yeah, the family pays for my rent, the school fees for my son, and the firstborn also. They also pay. I would like to work, but how, where, I don't know. But I would like to work. So we are trusting God to lead.
We spent an afternoon with the family and come face to face with the communication barrier as the deaf parents interact with their kids who are okay.
Sometimes they are not serious, they are doing their own things, but they observe. So sometimes they correct them and they do the right thing. And sometimes they watch, sometimes it's wrong. And time they go out and they see the hearing, they know these are hearings. So they understand that my parents are deaf and they're not hearing.
That is their daily norm, as the lack of sign language interpreters in points of service delivery, like government and even hospitals.
Many times, Nyayo House, hospital, they only use, they do writing, and it wastes times. Sometimes I've gone to Nyayo House, I'm writing, and the person in the office is not understanding what I'm writing. So he gets angry. He's complaining, he gets angry. So he asks an interpreter, and there's no interpreter around to help. So it's better for the government to appoint interpreters in different offices to help the deaf.
Helen vividly recalls the hard time they experienced when she delivered her second born, who they later found out was autistic. Doctors had a hard time explaining to them the condition of their son. And where they get services, providers attend to those that can hear first and leave them unattended to.
Myself, when I go to hospital, I don't even have money to pay my bills, and an interpreter is asking for money. I don't have money to pay an interpreter. So I'll take myself to the hospital, and communication is not good. Sometimes the nurse will not understand, and maybe you're having a pain and the nurse is prescribing a wrong medicine.
The challenges that the deaf face cuts across the society. At the busy Kencom stage, we meet Philip, who also has hearing impairment. His story is, however, different, as he was not born deaf. He lost his ability to hear due to an illness when he was 7 years old. That would be the beginning of his tribulations. Up until now, he has not been able to secure employment. All he depends on is this sweet business, where he gets paid on commission for anything he sells.
Naweza taka government itusaidie sisi deaf, ituwekee interpreters kwa job places, na ndo tuweze kupata opportunities juu ni ngumu sana kupata job juu wanasema hatuwezi ongea.
Nixon Kakiri, the chairman of the Kenya National Association of the Deaf, says the problem is bigger than it actually seems, as only 0.1% of the deaf are employed. He blames it on what he calls attitudinal problems from the rest of the world.
We currently have over 2.5 million deaf persons in Kenya. From the 2.5 population, we can only say 0.1% are the people who have secured employment opportunities. 0.1%. That is not sufficient. if you go to the government, there is the 5% reservation for employment. But if you do your research, persons with physical disability, persons with visual impairment, persons with albinism are there, but the deaf are not there because they fear the issue of communication. If we employ a deaf person, how are we going to communicate? Those are issues that have been raised.
Kakiri also notes that education is also a challenge for the deaf, as teachers are not well trained on sign language. He says that although there has been an increase in schools for the deaf in the country, there is no university for the deaf. Out of the 90 institutions of higher learning in Kenya, Moi, Egerton and Ebru universities are the only ones with programs that can accommodate the deaf.
Teachers who teach the deaf, they are not fully trained or fully equipped to train the deaf because they are not sufficiently trained, because they just go to the regular schools and then they are posted to go to teach the deaf without sign language knowledge. There's some who are even over 40 years who can't even spell their names. You wonder how are they communicating with the deaf students.
Kakiri says that they are pushing for the creation of a sign language bill that will make it mandatory for all institutions and churches to have a well-trained sign language interpreter to cater for the deaf.
Kenya National Association of the Deaf came up with the sign language bill. So this bill is trying to set up an entity that will accredit the sign language interpreters, plus how those interpreters are going to be certified and how the interpreters are going to work. So we have been pushing for the employment of sign language interpreters.
The deaf community now says they are hopeful that their pleas will reach to the government and that relevant agencies will come up with processes to ensure life for the deaf is made easier.
Not all the deafs are well up, so a deaf will not pay an interpreter. It's a government who should appoint interpreters in every institution. Most of the deafs are poor, so it's hard for them to pay an interpreter. It's not easy. It is for the government to accept and fight for the deaf and interpreters. So how will we succeed if the government is not working with the deaf? It will be hard. The deaf they become tired and they leave and they do their own things.
Always and always have consultations with the deaf. Listen to their opinions, because they are the wearers of the shoes and they clearly understand where the shoe pinches. This idea of decision making without consulting the deaf people is wrong.
The hearing impaired community in Kenya say that for years they have been left out when it comes to communication in government offices, in public hospitals, in schools as well as churches, and their plea is for the government to hire sign language interpreters to lessen their burden and make them feel as part of the community. Lilian, Kamau, Ebru TV.